If you think of every time that you see a patient, there's a story that unfolds there. And, it's your job, whether you're the dental assistant, the dentist, or the hygienist, to tell that story. It takes a real talented person to be able to point out the positives and focus on the positives because, you have to give a little reward, give a little sugar with the medicine. But I think sometimes the best thing we can do is just, be frank. Your records are kind of a problem, and here's why. Your dentistry is only as good as your documentation. If you don't care enough to do that half of the job, then why bother to show up and do the other half? Because if you're not going to take the time to describe it to somebody, to create your defense from a medical legal standpoint, then why put yourself out there?
Get ready for your unofficial dental hygiene podcast. These are the tales of two hygienists, one East Coast RDH and one West Coast hygienist. Listen as they tackle the profession of dental hygiene with humor and enthusiasm. Now, please join Michelle Strange and Andrew Johnston as they tell you a tale of two hygienists.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of A Tale of Two Hygienists, episode number 292. My name is Andrew.
And my name is Michelle. And we also have another podcaster in our intro and also our interview. This is just going to be one long episode. Duane Tinker, or Tink, as many of his friends know him. Welcome to the podcast.
Glad to be back. I've missed you guys. It's been too long.
It has been a minute. I mean, the last time we actually saw each other, you and I have done some podcasting, but was at Voices of Dentistry a year and a half ago?
At least. Probably, it was summer of 19, I think, wasn't it?
Oh my gosh.
Right before the pandemic.
No, wasn't it 2020? Wasn't it right before everything shut down?
No, further back.
Oh my
God.
In fact, it was funny because
don't call him out on our podcast.
I'm doing the nomad thing in the mountains of Colorado. Remember that, we were kind of joking about that because, I'm podcasting from my RV in the mountains, and you and I were talking about aerosols. Bam, 6 months later, we're in the middle of this pandemic.
Gosh.
We're like,
yeah,
it's your fault. You brought this on.
Seriously, it really kind of is. I was talking a lot of trash about aerosols in our industry. I definitely have learned a lot because I was just scratching the surface of my knowledge around aerosols and the aerosol standard and all of that. And man, haven't we all learned a ton?
Well, I think if you play the clock back a little bit, you remember in that episode, I called you an expert in all things.
And I was like, no, I'm not an expert.
No, not me. How about now?
I know, right? Oh my gosh. It is crazy. I'm just so grateful. This whole pandemic's been horrible, but I'm so darn grateful that we are talking about it. Cause I was going to probably get to a point where I was going to be years into that, and people were like, can this chick just shut up about aerosols already? And and now we have research, we have devices, we have people, it's a big part of the conversation. The whole OSAP meeting that I did the annual conference back in June, I think, and that was a big chunk of it. And I'm like, I cannot believe this is happening.
You're ahead of your time, girl. Truly.
Yeah, thank you. I like to bring up things that nobody wants to talk about.
Well, I was going to say, for all the crap that she spits out, she finally landed on one. So that's
I know.
Kind of how I went.
What is it? Broken clocks, right? Twice.
That's right.
Say I'm going to be a billionaire.
Right?
Manifest that.
It's manifesting it. Exactly. So you have a podcast called Talking with the Toothcop. I've been on it a few times. Me and India Chance with Level Up has been on there a few times. But for anybody who's not familiar with you, didn't hear your last podcast with us, and just for everybody, hold on. Before we get into the interview part, I do want to, because I'm getting ahead of myself, because this is actually the intro. I'm sorry. Tell us about the fact, because you and I were just talking about the fact that you're finishing your nomad life and I'm starting my nomad life, but we're both in this dental industry. So I have so many questions. Tell us about what you were doing, living the dream in an RV.
Well, one of the most beautiful things about being a business owner is being able to have a vision and create that vision and then execute. And for me, my business was controlling me. I'm constantly on the road and I still am, but I decided to take control of it. I wanted to be able to, do what I do, which is work with dental offices, but on my own terms. I still enjoy going into the dental office, but I found that I can scale and leverage my time working remotely. So I was using Zoom with my clients since 2015 when people were still saying,
talk about ahead of your time.
What's that? Yeah. So 2019, my wife is really into dogs, and she always has been. And we decided we were going to, buy an RV and just go live on the road for a couple months, just kind of as a test run. So we bought a 39-foot RV, fifth wheel, and a big old Dodge mega cab, so we could transport our 6 dogs inside the truck with us, not in the bed. Inside the cab of the truck. I took the back seat out. We, put 6 dog crates in there. And we traveled the country with our dogs. And I still worked. I would have scheduled appointments. So I'd pull over on the side of the road, or we'd stop at a rest stop somewhere, and I'd jump on Zoom and meet with my clients. And it was great. We did that for about 2.5 months. We had a lot of fun, both professionally and also personally. And I realized one thing pre-pandemic, before it was cool to work from home, that 1, people didn't care. And 2, people actually thought it was pretty cool. They're like, oh man. So it kind of became a joke, hey, where's Tink at today? I was kind of embarrassed the first time somebody called me out. They're like, dude, is that like an RV? Are you at a campground? I'm like, trying to straighten up my tie and look all professional. And they're like, oh, dude, that is so cool. And I realized I had an epiphany. I'm like, oh my God, I can do this. I could do this full time. So that was a short 2-month trip. But, and I still enjoy having a primary base of operations. So
what is it that you do? What is it that you do that allows you to be mobile and do things on Zoom?
All things compliance, really. Office inspections. I'm kind of positioned myself to be that go-to guy when people have questions. Basically, I tell my clients, if you have an emergency, call 911 first, call me next. So it could be an employee issue, could be a needle stick, it could be, heaven forbid, a patient death, could be they get contacted by a government agency, whether it's radiation folks, the DEA, Medicaid, and they have some questions. Now, I'm not an attorney, and I don't hold myself out to be an attorney. I'm not a dentist, but I've been there. I've done that. I've seen a lot. And I'm that guy who sit right there and hold the dentist's hand as they're going through some really icky stuff. And that's probably 90% of what I do. Now, maybe not quite that high. I mean, I do a lot of preventative stuff as well, like office inspections and staff training and different things like that. I do a lot of record auditing. And I think
that's what we're going to talk about today. So you only did the nomad life for 2 months or so?
It's a test run. Got to start somewhere.
Yeah, for sure. That's crazy because now it's so trendy. So trendy. I mean, everybody always asks if I'm going to be doing RV life. I'm not going to be doing RV life. I personally have a hard time thinking about having to then fly out somewhere and leave my RV or van with my animals. I just envision crazy things happening of I don't know, maybe the power stops and they bake to death in this RV. I mean, pretty horrific things, right? But things that could happen, or somebody trying to stealing my animals or something happening to them. I don't know. I was I can't mentally handle that.
You'll figure it out. When the desire is strong enough, you'll figure it out.
Yeah, no, I think I'm going to just do the Airbnb nursing, travel nursing housing, which is
locum tenens.
So far it's working. Yeah. So far. But I am taking this 12-foot enclosed trailer with me. I think that might be my real hindrance is finding somewhere for it to park. Because even my HOA, I mean, I hate a freaking HOA with all of my soul. All of my soul. I hate an HOA. And they are on me right now, just you can't park it overnight. I'm okay, but shut up. Find me. I don't even know. I have nowhere else for it to go right now. It's staying here. Sorry.
No, you find yourself in the Dallas area and you need to ditch your trailer, just give me a shout.
Thank you. Well, and that's the thing. I even told Andrew, I was Andrew, so tell me about your HOA. What is there?
The rules there.
What's their rules around having a trailer? Because I might have to park it at your house.
Yeah. But that's also the beautiful thing, though, is Michelle has so many contacts throughout this industry all over the world. So she can go probably go all the way down to Argentina or something. Take that trailer all the way down there.
What a dream. Well, I just last night took my nephew to see Jungle Cruise, and they were on the Amazon. And so we were dreaming on the way home of how we could get to the Amazon by driving. It was fun.
No, there you go. We had a really cool experience when we were on our 2-month trip. We have a professional friend. She's a fellow consultant. Now I won't say who she is so people don't flock to her backyard, but her and her husband their backyard is Glacier National Park. It doesn't get any cooler than that.
Well, Montana 2022 for me.
So they were gracious enough to let us stay with them. they have RV hookup and everything. So we stayed with them for a few days, and it's just really nice to connect and enjoy some time with them. And then we went and explored the park a little bit and dealt with some vehicle problems, and our truck nearly burned up right outside their driveway.
Oh my gosh.
That was a crazy story, but we had a lot of really cool adventures. So, I hope that you go out and enjoy your adventures as well. But hey, if you're good with Airbnbs, explore them all.
Yeah, I am. And I really do, like, currently it's going to be a little hard. I mean, I think everybody knows that I have like a elderly dog who's not, she's doing okay, but I don't know how much time I have left with her. And my cat just started chemo because why not? So I'm a little cautious where I'm going. Like, I'm trying to strategically find homes that don't have stairs and stuff because she can't get up and down the stairs very well. But once those challenges are no longer in my life, which I hope they are there for many more years because I would tolerate them because I love her so much. But if that does change, I'm really going to start aiming for super cool places like tree houses and boats. And so if y'all know of any cool, like, spots to go hang out, like, I am here for, like, living in an experience. I'm really excited about that. And also, if everybody hasn't already, like, on my Facebook page and on our Instagram page, or our link in the bio, I have a Google form where you can put your address, and I'm pinning it on, like, my own private Google map. That way I know where everybody's at, because I would love to do, like, networking events and, like, have a gathering of, like, just cool people and see everybody along the way in their, like, natural habitat and not just general conferences. So I'm excited. I got to thank Charlotte Stirk from Burst for that idea.
I love that.
Before we get to the interview, we want to say a big thank you to Paradise Dental Technologies, or PDT, for supporting the continuing education portion of this podcast for so many years. If you do not know already, many of our full-length episodes count for CE. You'll find the links in the show notes, or you can sign up for our newsletter by going to ataleoftwohygienists.com. When you sign up for the newsletter, we will periodically send out links to shows that have expiring CE courses attached. And none of this could be possible without the support of the amazing people over at PDT. So check out their hygiene and other instruments at pdtdental.com. That's pdtdental.com. Now, on to the interview.
Let's talk about records and charts and stuff, because that's kind of what we brought you on for. And one thing that Andrew and I were chit-chatting about as we, like, look at our content calendar is that we haven't had a big conversation around that, and it's so important. And Andrew has made fun of me before because I have, like, a small chapter of a novel for each patient, but we want to really talk to you about, like, what that looks like, record keeping should look like for patients, and what an audit looks like, and hopefully prevent us from getting in trouble over some things. So tell us more. Let's start this conversation. Where's a good spot?
Well, let's talk about this in a few different parts here. So let's talk about what's necessary in a record, first of all. Then we'll talk about some common problems and then different types of audits. Because, even though it seems like a pretty narrow topic, there's actually a lot to talk about. So some of the more common problems that I see, believe it or not, is the number one most common problem really is no clinical note.
Like zero, nothing.
Just none. Yeah.
Yeah. The doctor assumes the assistant's writing the note. The doctor assumes the assistant's writing the note, or vice versa. And I can't tell you how often when I'm auditing, I'm like, where's the note? Like, that's just, it's ridiculous. That's more
like
common.
You get in the ledger, like there's an appointment, like they were here, and then you just go to look for the note and it's just not there. Okay.
Yeah. And there's no story to be told there. It's like, what happened? Why did this patient present? Why did we bill out for a limited exam? And this patient obviously just had an operative something or other. So what's the story? What happened? So that is by and large the biggest problem. But if you think of every time that you see a patient, there's a story that unfolds there. And, it's your job, whether you're the dental assistant, the dentist, or the hygienist, to tell that story. So it's important to be clear on who's documenting what. And, I find that sometimes dentists are not very patient when it comes to teaching their assistant what needs to be documented. And oftentimes the assistant will sit there and listen to what's going on, but not really comprehend and take notes and relate that encounter to the clinical note. And in the end, all you see is, the doctor's recommendation, 2 and 4 MOB, MOBL, gingivectomy, just whatever, I'm like, how do we get to that?
Duane, let me ask a kind of a follow-up question, because whose responsibility is it to put in that note? I mean, is it the doctor's responsibility to train the assistant, and then now it's the assistant's responsibility to do it? I mean, is that acceptable practice?
Well, ultimately, the dentist or the clinician is responsible. There's some state regulations that stipulate who can document in a patient record.
Oh.
I've been studying regulations in different states on a project that I'm working on here lately, and I can't remember what state it was that I saw that only certain people can document things in the patient record. I thought, that's ridiculous. Doesn't make any sense to me.
Like they can only type it in to the patient record?
Yeah.
Or write it? I guess.
I cannot remember which state that was. I thought, well, that's just ridiculous. If you're an assistant, if you're a front office person, if you're, obviously the hygienist. But I have people call me all the time and say, hey, look, who has to sign our hygienist notes? Well, did the hygienist see the patient? Yeah. Well, and she wrote the note. Yeah. Well, then she should sign her note. It's a legal document. It's a legal record of what happened, what you did, what you saw. That's like, it's a witness statement. So you've got to sign your own record.
I have another question about that, because you're using a term, signing the note, right? So in the old way of doing like the paper charts, very common practice to sign your notes, right? I think we all grew up doing that in our little hygiene career. So, but now with digital notes, is the signature, if it's entered under you as a user, does that count as a signature, or do you actually have to have another signature?
Not everybody uses a computer under their own login. That's the problem. Mm-hmm. So just because, you're logged in doesn't mean that you actually wrote the note. I mean, it could. I would suggest if you can't actually electronically sign your signature, that you at least type your name, full first name, last name, title, license number.
I do. Oh, I don't do that. Should I do that?
Yeah. I mean, there's different states have different requirements regarding signatures, but, cast a wide net. Be clear who you are. Who are you? Are you licensed? What license level? What's your number? That way we don't get two Michelles confused.
True. I also, in Andrew and Dentrix long time ago, I used to be able, me and the doctor had signatures, and like you would sign it at the end of the day.
Yeah. I mean, they have it in most of the softwares, but not all of them have that little thing. I don't know how many people are actually
doing it.
Yeah. Because you don't have to have it checked. So if you're doing a workflow thing and you're like, look, I don't want to put in my password every single freaking time I do something, then you disable that feature.
Yeah. And a lot of people do, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So I think it's a terrible idea.
Well, and then you bring up a good point, because I've been in, temping in the last year since the pandemic and everything. And even in the office that I volunteered at, where we had a very transient clinic, everybody would put like their first initial and like last name. And it used to bother, like my whole name is like Michelle Strange, RDH, like spelled out every single time, because I'm like, but how would they know?
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. A lot of people, they live in their own world, and they don't realize that the people outside of their own little world, that the record needs to make sense to them. So they may know who SB or MH are, but a third party has to review that record. It should be clear to them, who that person was and what certification level they have.
What about shorthand? Because I go into somebody's office and I'm like, what the hell does this mean?
Mm-hmm. So like they put like, LA, which means local anesthetic, but also lower interior, which also is.
Yes. Yeah. I'm like, what the heck does this mean? Or I'll see multiple like acronyms and I'm like, is that even like a real acronym, or is that just your acronym? Or am I just completely oblivious to typical medical jargon? Well, that too. Thank you, Andrew. I don't need you to confirm that, but
yeah, it's like WNL. Is it, within normal limits, or we never looked?
Yeah, I know. We've definitely moved past that. Exactly. So like, is shorthand even allowed at this point?
I can't say that it's not allowed, but I think communication is key, and in an effort to not be misunderstood, let's just use plain English. I mean, you look at a lot of different professions and they're moving away from using acronyms and though they're convenient, to just plain language, say what you mean, you mean what you say, avoid any confusion. Those are important parts of communication.
And I think a lot of your programs could also help you. Like I had some words stored up. So when I did type WNL, it autocorrected to the actual words I wanted to use. And in Dendrix for a while, I had a template for my notes, and I had drop downs of things that I would talk about. So like if I were talking about oral hygiene instruction, I had all the items, and I had a plethora of items for OHI, and I would just click what I demonstrated that day. And it was so nice and easy.
I guess my thought would be, if you're going to use an acronym, the first time you use it, spell it out.
Right. And then throughout the chart, you could just use the acronym like an actual paper.
How do you feel about templates in general?
I know a lot of people don't like templates. I do like templates because they help prompt people to document a lot of pertinent negatives. The whole point and in the details of your notes is to describe not only the conditions that you saw, but also the conditions that didn't exist. Because your whole goal with your note is to paint a picture. But we don't have time to write 1,000 words. So templates are a good prompt. There's some inherent concerns about using templates, though. I mean, it's a guide. People lean on it too heavily, and they don't take the time to either complete or populate the answers that are not populated, or they forget to change pre-populated answers, or they neglect to delete information that doesn't apply, or we have pertinent information that's not correct that's left standing in the record. And sometimes it poses a conflict, especially in like a billing audit. So what actually happened there? I had one just yesterday, auditing a record. They billed out for a temporary crown, and the template said temporary crown, but there was no response there. So looking at other records in that template, there was a response when a temporary was provided. So my premise there is, on that particular case, there was no documentation to support billing for that temporary crown. So that resulted in an overpayment. So it was a simple mistake, I'm sure, but nonetheless, there's no documentation to support that. And unfortunately, when that happens, there's a term for that. It's a big clunky F word. Not that one, it's the word fraud. And, and people pucker. They're like, oh, but we didn't commit fraud. No, you made a mistake. But it's treated as fraud. And that's the unfortunate reality. So
if we were going to kind of, you don't have to run down every single thing that needs to be in a template, but what are the most key components to like a template note then?
Why did the patient present? What did we do to address the patient's chief concern? Even if it's, I haven't been to a dentist in a long time or haven't had my teeth cleaned in 6 years, that is effectively their chief complaint. What did you do to respond to that chief complaint? Did you take x-rays? Were they ordered? Because, in every state, x-rays are regulated as a medical device. They can't be taken without a doctor's order. So it should be clear what x-rays you took, that they were ordered by the dentist, what other care that you provided for the patient. You reviewed the medical history. That's a key one right there. All too often I see no change in medical history. But when I go back and look at every clinical note for every date of service, they all say the same thing. But there's no medical history form on file. So what was the patient's original medical history? If there was no change and we don't know what it was, how do we know what it is now?
Yeah.
So, yeah, medical history is important.
Oral cancer screening?
Yeah. I mean, for hygiene notes, just the usual oral cancer screen, oral, basic oral health, what's their home care like, OHI, what did you actually do for the patient? Another one I had from yesterday, they billed out for prophy, and the hygienist had a really lengthy note, and she talked all about the patient's family and what the patient does in their spare time, but never indicated anything in the record that even hinted that she actually provided prophy.
Oh, Lord.
Well, they billed for it, and I got reimbursed for it, and it looked like they billed for something they didn't do. So
wait, we can't bill out for talking to people? There's no billable code for,
I was going to say,
for our chatting?
Jaw jacking does not count as oral health instructions.
So what does that conversation look like when you talk to the hygienist or an assistant or a doctor and you're like, did y'all forget the clinical stuff?
I typically highlight that. I mean, I make a very visual graphic, audit report so they can see, what areas they did well, what areas they didn't, and on the individual record, what really sucked about the record. But I try to also point out some good things, because it's so easy to focus on the negative, what we didn't do. I mean, you can find problems in every dental record, and I do. It takes a real talented person to be able to point out the positives and focus on the positives because, you have to give a little reward, give a little sugar with the medicine. But I think sometimes the best thing we can do is just, be frank. Your records are kind of a problem, and here's why. And of course, I always list out recommendations on things that they need to do. But, a lot of that is just misuse of those templates, like we kind of talked about a few minutes ago. There's a lot of problems there. So learning how to constructively use a template and tell the story. And, people just don't go back and review their templates. And I see quite a few dental offices that just use the templates that come with their Dentrix, for example. The only perfect template is the one that you've reviewed and tweaked, modified to suit your needs. I mean, I have templates. I sell templates. I tweak templates for my clients. And even then, I tell them, look, they're not perfect until you've reviewed every one of them and made the changes that you need to make to reflect what you actually do in your practice. So
that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like our home care. It only matters what they'll use.
Exactly.
Another concern that I see, and I see a lot of lazy hygiene. Now, I can't so much speak to the standard of care as you can, but perio charting, how often has it got to be done?
Oh, let's talk
I'm sure
about
you talked about this with other episodes.
I think though it bears refreshing since we just went into all of our offices and talked very specifically about this as well.
Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, patients since 2007, you've done a perio chart on them once in 2015. Here we are, 2021, and they've faithfully seen you at least twice a year or more. And
there's
today your dentist gets to sit down and tell the patient that they have periodontal disease. Well, whose fault is that?
Or they transfer. They go somewhere else and because that happened to me a lot. I was like, these are the notes?
Yeah.
These are your records? What has been happening?
Yeah.
Yeah, the words supervised neglect flash in my mind. I'm like, oh gosh, not only is that not good, it's bad.
So are we going to actually name the standard of what we're supposed to be doing? What do you have? What do you recommend for us? Because we have ours, but I'm afraid to say it in case I'm wrong.
Well, so the standard that I'm most familiar with is the American Dental Hygiene Association. You guys have a different standard that comes to mind?
I think that's the same.
And if I'm not mistaken, they recommend annual perio charting, right?
It's annual perio charting, but then it's also every perio maintenance is supposed to have a new updated record.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely don't see that very often.
And that's crazy to me because that's all I ever did.
I'm sorry. I don't think I've ever seen it at every perio maintenance.
Oh my God. I can't even imagine. In every single perio maintenance, I did my own perio chart. This was in my second perio office. But the periodontist, because she was honestly the one that she read every single one of my notes every single day, signed off on them. She was a little bit of an OCD maniac, but to her credit, that's her little butt on the line, right? And so every single time she called out she and I were the actual voice works happening, like the Florida Probe voice works.
Yeah.
And she would call that out. And every single time in my other practice, even though they didn't do a really good job of it, I probed every single person without question and documented it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That blows my mind.
But I've seen it both ways in my career and I've been guilty of it. Michelle, I've talked about this before. It's unfortunately, I was that annual one, Duane. I was every single year we'd have a perio chart, no problem. And then when they come back for perio maintenance, I would still perio chart the problem areas, but I would never record it. And I never notated that anywhere. But it's mostly for me, I'm like, okay, well, how do I need to treat this patient? But that was where I was failing, was I didn't tell anybody what I was doing. And at that time, though, I didn't know anything about anything. So I didn't realize what the ramifications of that were. But now as we're going through, it's the bare minimum is annual, but that's still not enough for a perio patient.
And when I look at a record, I'm not a clinician. I'm not making any determination. I'm not saying, hey, this is a failure to meet the standard of care. I always phrase it as this could be a standard of care issue. I present the information that there's no perio chart, present the idea that it could be a standard of care issue, and it's ultimately up to the doctor to review the record and review my concerns and say, oh yeah, you know what, we're not rising to the occasion.
And then what needs to be in that perio chart? Does it need to be full mouth probing, bleeding, exudate, mucogingival defects, all of that, right? That's a full perio chart.
It's a record of the quality of care that you provided. So what quality of care do you provide? If you're providing poor quality, do a substandard perio chart.
Quote that. Put that at the front of the message today.
Yeah.
Really, and I've said this in a room full of specialists even. Your dentistry is only as good as your documentation. If you don't care enough to do that half of the job, then why bother to show up and do the other half? Because if you're not going to take the time to describe it to somebody, to create your defense from a medical legal standpoint, then why put yourself out there? That's kind of my thought. If you care about what you're doing, take the time to describe it, because that description, that documentation, that's what it takes to cover your backside and show that you're providing good dentistry and good dental hygiene. So, you're a good clinician. You're proud of what you do. It's got to be exemplified in your record.
And I think that's the thing too. I think that a lot of young dentists, I've worked with a lot of young dentists in my career, and once they understand that once they diagnose consistently, they have the records, They can create that same diagnosis. And then for that diagnosis, they can create that same treatment plan over and over and over again. Not only will they be more profitable, they'll be more confident with their patients. They'll have that retention of the patients. There's so many things that come from that data collection and documentation that go beyond just like what's right, And if we could just get the hygienists on board with that importance, because like they almost don't feel like they have like a skin in the game sometimes.
Or they don't feel valued, respected, and heard by their doctor.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say that too.
And I hear a lot of complaints from dentists about their assistant, but yet they don't really take the time to train them on, what information they should be recording, why it's important. But they'll be the first one to, throw a temper tantrum when their dentist or when the assistant doesn't get it right. And it's like, look, I understand your frustration, but you've got to take some time to teach them. But then the problem is the dentist doesn't necessarily know what they need to document either. And it's not that they're not smart. They just don't know what they don't know. A lot of the confusion comes in because there's differences in what's necessary for clinical documentation for clinical purposes, and then what's required from a regulatory standpoint. And that causes a lot of consternation for a lot of dentists in particular, that we have to bother with things like consent and having people sign treatment plans and, the level of detail that's necessary in our progress notes. It's like, it's not clinically relevant. I'm like, I get that, but the state says that you have to document that. And if you don't, well, then they got you on a rule violation. They're going to take their money back. I see that not just on the Medicaid side, but also on commercial payer side as well. There's record keeping requirements both from, the state dental board, Medicaid programs, but also from insurance companies. And, especially if you're in network and you agree to be an in-network provider, you've agreed to certain rules to provide records to a certain standard. So I fail to meet that standard, you get caught. Doesn't matter if you got paid on it. When they find after the fact there's a rule violation, they take money back. They recoup money, and that really sets people off. So it helps to know what the rules are and what the expectations are. The other thing is going back to the templates. You periodically got to review your templates, make sure that they're still on point, that they address key points. Did you review medical history? If it's a situation where you should have consent, does it address the consent issue? Does it reference that you have a signed consent form and that you discuss the risk, benefits, and alternatives of the procedure with the patient before providing that service? What was the expected outcome or prognosis for the patient? Did the patient have a good outcome? Did you have any complications during the procedure? What was the patient's condition when they left? Did you perform it, or did you complete a periodic chart if it was necessary? So, and of course, sign your notes.
Is there any requirement that you know of that talks about, okay, so let's say that we're planning an extraction for a patient. Like, what is the replacement of that missing tooth? Is there any rules there?
Again, it goes back to just documenting the story of what happened. If we really need a rule to describe everything that's necessary in the record, we're kind of missing the point. Your progress note is an opportunity to describe what happened. And the audience for your record, it's to remind you years down the road what happened. So if you get sued, the record should be detailed enough to help you remember what happened with that patient, that particular encounter, considering you've probably seen thousands of patients since then. The other part of that, it's a record for third parties to be able to draw the same information, understand the same, what happened with that patient, what did they present with, what did you recommend, why did you recommend it, what were the conditions that were present, what were the conditions that were not present that might have been necessary for you to consider, what was your thought process? So you can't mandate that in a regulation, but what is your thought process, especially if you do deviate from the standard of care? Fail to check the patient's drug history, fail to use proper isolation as required. There's situations where it may be necessary to deviate from the standard of care, but you've got to document your thought process. What were you thinking? Why did you do that?
Do you feel like when you're documenting that kind of stuff, since the patient's record is technically theirs and they can take it with them, would that ever create any issues down the road?
I guess it could, and I get that question every now and again. I think having a good record will serve you better than it will ever hurt you, in my experience. I think the reason people get in trouble is because of substandard records. I can't point to a situation in recent memory where having too much detail has come back and bit somebody in the backside.
Unless it's like subjective, like this person was such the biggest jerk. I hated them so. Yeah, right. PETA patient.
Right.
Write their notes.
Teacher's aid.
Well, and I've definitely put some, not that specific thing in there, but I've, maybe if I'm talking about OHI and they are just like not interested, I will say attempted to do oral hygiene instructions and make recommendations for X, Y, and Z. The patient appeared to be uninterested and non-responsive to my recommendations. And like now I know for the next time, I don't know, maybe approach in a different way, or maybe they're in a better mood. But I'm like, if one day they do get these records, they're going to hear or read all of my thoughts about it. Yet again, I reminded them of X, Y, and Z. We've had this conversation multiple times. This was their response. Like, I try to be very detailed, mostly because I want to know what I'm talking about each time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I'm serious. If they do ever get their records, they're going to know every aspect of my brain during that appointment because I write it down.
Yeah. I say good on you for that because, I think that's an important part of the story. You did communicate that. They sat there and ignored you.
Right.
Jeez. Okay.
Like, good talk. All right. Moving on to
Yeah.
the next thing. Let's just get in and do this appointment now.
Yeah.
I do have a quick question. I don't know if you have more to say about what you're talking about, but I'm really curious. And if so, we can kind of skip this until we're ready. But I also want to know more about like x-rays and intraoral pictures and documenting that within the notes and like when you should take, especially intraoral pictures.
Yeah, well, they say pictures worth 1,000 words. So you can never go wrong taking pictures, especially if you have a radiolucency or something that just doesn't show up very well in a radiograph. Take a picture. Then I hear the next question I get is, well, they're not going to reimburse me for it. Okay, I understand where you're going with that, but you need to document this patient's condition. You can worry about the reimbursement issue later, but you need to document CYA. Take pictures, take the necessary x-rays, and, deal with the rest, as it helps tell the story of what happened and, what the patient's problem was, what you recommended. It helps support that.
Well, my thought is, I guess the real reason I'm asking this is because I'm curious about double documenting. And if I have to do this, because typically in my progress notes, I will write, like the oral cancer screening, the health history, and I typically take the x-rays at the top of the appointment. And so I'll say like I took 4 bite wings, 2 retakes because a patient was struggling with gagging, or I overlapped, and I'm actually documenting my retakes, which I know a lot of people don't anymore because now, well, especially now with the digital, because now digital, it like just takes it over, right? But I was taught on, the good old film. And so you had your retakes in there. So you needed to document it. So maybe I'm doing that in an old school like way, but I also like to talk about the journey. Maybe they had tori, maybe they had a limited opening, whatever it is. And especially with implants, I like to make sure I document how I got those threads to line up so I can monitor bone levels. And then I'll talk about intraoral pictures captured for X, Y, and Z. But do I have to even write in there that I took x-rays? Because there's a ledger for it? Yeah, okay.
Well,
that makes sense.
So by doing so, you're kind of, watch like a Perry Mason TV show where they're in the courtroom, one of the attorneys stands up and presents a murder weapon. And, Your Honor, I'd like to introduce Exhibit A. This is the murder weapon. Everybody can see a weapon and probably draw the same conclusion. That's probably the murder weapon, but they're entering that into evidence. So I think to acknowledge that in your clinical notes, it kind of serves the same purpose. So that's why we do reference things like what x-rays we took and what our observations were, that the patient signed a consent form, summarize our discussion about the treatment recommendations, benefits of treatment, risks, alternatives. It's for the same reason. We're tying that into the record. It's not just there. We're acknowledging that we reviewed it, that it exists. And back to your point on radiographs, they don't speak for themselves. It's 100% what your observations were. If it's not written, it didn't happen. If it's not written, it wasn't observed. So yeah, good on you for taking the time to notate that.
And you better believe I'm going to tell people why I didn't take a good x-ray. Like that kid bit me. He bit me. He closed down. You can't see a damn open contact because of this. It's not me.
Yeah.
It's not me. I don't want anybody judging my x-rays later on.
Hey, as long as you keep your comments objectives, do it to it,
Yeah.
You kind of touched on a moment ago, and I had a thought I was going to share, and it kind of slipped my mind. It came back to me. It's important to document objective information with things that you can see, feel. See and touch, observe with your 5 senses. Okay. Nobody generally wants to know how you feel, but there is an exception to that. And that is if there's a safety issue with the patient. You know, you have a patient that's making threatening comments or just inappropriate comments, whether it be of a sexual nature or, hinting about physical violence. And, you're considering firing the patient, if you will, to avoid patient abandonment issues. That would be a perfect time where it would be very appropriate to document how what their behavior was and how it made you feel. They were standing, screaming, raising their fists, talking in a loud voice, using bad language. And I felt scared. That would be the only time I would suggest documenting subjective information.
Oh, so it is in the clinical note, not somewhere else in the chart.
If you were directly involved with the patient, it was during the patient encounter, yeah, so medical note. If not, in situations like that, and I deal with those fairly often, unfortunately, where somebody has a threatening patient in the office, everybody else that was not involved should write up an incident report or a witness statement, and those should be attached to the patient record.
Something else just popped into my head too. Sometimes I do document and tell me if this is a good thing. I feel like it is though. But if I know I left stuff, left calculus, left stain, left whatever, maybe the patient was, growing tired, their jaw was having issues. I'll say, I believe that there is subgingival calculus left on number 18, could not remove today and maybe next time. But I mean, I feel like that's a good thing to do.
Okay. But if you maybe say why.
Oh, and I do say, like, patient was growing tired, jaw was hurting, they had to leave, whatever it is. Or, running out of time, we'll need to bring patient back for fine scale. I believe that X, Y, and Z is still present somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've always had a question about that one, though, Duane, because, we're taught that, right, Michelle? We're taught that a lot. But you always feel like, okay, what if that patient doesn't ever come back? Like, what if? And then it turns into a big problem. And then it comes back on me because I didn't do my job in the time that they were supposed to do the job.
Yeah. Just make sure you inform the patient and document that you inform the patient.
Yeah, I definitely do that.
Love that. Comes down to communication.
I probably talk too much to my patient about this kind of stuff. I'm like,
That's a surprise.
Yeah,
that's
probably.
A surprise for everyone to hear those words.
Shut up.
It always cracks me up when they ask me a question. I'm like, and they can understand what I'm saying. Like, wow, y'all are talented.
Well, I know that we only have a few minutes left in this interview. And is it possible to quickly talk about the auditing process and like what that would look like?
So there's a couple of different things that you can do. One, odds are your practice is going to be audited by somebody outside the practice, insurance companies, Medicaid, government agencies, attorneys. All right. So the best thing you can do is be proactive. Basically, two types of audits. One's a prospective audit where before you hit send to send your claims to the insurance company, take a moment, out your day sheet and review your day sheet. Are all the claims that we're about to bill, is everything correct? Oh, no, you know what? Actually, we didn't do an MOB. We did an MOBL. I was about to send an underbilling situation. Or, you know what? Actually, we treatment planned for that gingivectomy, but we actually didn't perform that. Oops, I almost billed that out. It's so much easier to fix it on the front end. So to do a prospective audit like that, very simple, it doesn't take very long. It'll save your billing staff months trying to fix this stuff in the aftermath. So it's important to do that on some level and have some paperwork to show that you then have a record retention policy for that audit process, because it is an audit. The next part is periodically go back and review some of your clinical notes. Review 10 records a month, or, if you can't do 10 records a month, do 10 records a quarter. If you can't do that, do 10 records a year. Do 5 records of yours and 5 of one of your colleagues of a equal or lesser training level. And, look at the level or the record in great detail. Did we do perio treatment? Did we have consent for that procedure? Was there a treatment plan? Did we verify that patient's insurance? Was what we billed, was it correct? And is it supported by the progress note for that date of service? That's where you're really getting into the nuts and bolts. Write up a little audit sheet. Use a checklist. Here's what we needed to have. Here's what we actually have. And when you find that there's issues, go back and fix those retroactively, but also look ahead and what are the opportunities to fix this so we don't keep making the mistakes going forward. Really important. 1, to document your efforts, and 2, to actually make those changes and do this on a regular but periodic basis for everybody in the practice. You don't have to be the dentist, and we're not questioning the dentist's judgment. And as a non-clinician, I'm not questioning the hygienist's judgment. I'm just reviewing the record. Does the record make sense? Is it complete? Is it accurate? You don't need to have a degree to figure that out. And that's the information that's really critical. But just think of it as a qualitative audit.
Awesome. Andrew, any last questions?
No, I'm good. Duane, I have actually, in another time, I have so many questions about the audit and like hygiene audits and chart audits for doctors and all sorts of other things. I think we're going to have you come back though for that.
I'd be glad to. We actually have a boot camp coming up in November. I would be thrilled if you would come to boot camp.
Oh, what's the boot camp?
It's something that I do for my clients every year. I open it up to non-clients to come join us as well. It's November 19th and 20th here, and it's in Hearst, actually, by DFW Airport. And it's 2 days of all things compliance. And this year, we're going to really get into audit processes and record auditing and the mechanics behind compliance programs. So I'd be honored if you guys would come join us.
I don't think Andrew's ever signed up for a course faster.
I would love this. And then Michelle just can bring her trailer over and then it'll be fine.
I'll just drive in and it'll be fine.
Yeah. I'm so glad to be able to do this again this year.
No, we're so happy to have you on. We would love for you to tell everybody where they can find more information and maybe to hire you for services.
Guys, if you're struggling with compliance, and everybody does, so don't feel bad. I think the best thing you can do is just be honest and say, hey, I need some help, and that's okay. I try to make things very simple and very painless. So respect and dignity are cool. Dentalcompliance.com is our website. I invite you to check out our podcast, Talking with the Toothcop, and we talk about all things compliance and risk management related. So you can find it right next to Tailored to Hygienists on your favorite podcast app.
Yes. Awesome. Well, thank you, Duane. It's been great.
Glad to be back.
Well, another great week, another great episode. We thank you all so much for listening each week. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, whatever podcasting app you're using. Also, just a reminder, our guests are so fantastic that they love when you reach out. They love when you interact with them on social media. And you can interact with us on social media as well at Instagram or Facebook. We're also on LinkedIn. You can find us at A Tale of Two Hygienists. You can also go to our website at tailoredtohygienist.com. And we would love for you to go there and subscribe for our newsletter. We have lots of stuff on our website. We have a learning center. You can search for any episode. This is an easy place for you to find the links for our CE courses and take the test. There's just so much more there. So head over to atailoredtohygienist.com. And if you want, you can also send us an email. I'm Michelle at atailoredtohygienist.com. And then there's Andrew, who is Andrew at atailoredtohygienist.com. And we just want to say thank you so much. If you love this episode and you're loving the podcast, we would love for you to subscribe and leave us a review. And, 5-star, go ahead and do it. 5-star, just hit that 5-star and then leave us a review. We really appreciate it. We love reading them. It fuels our fire. And we just appreciate you guys so much. I think that's it, Andrew. Anything else?
Nope, that's it. Have a good week, everybody.
Bye, y'all.